My name's Micah Wood. I'm going to talk on becoming a better developer. I did just look up there to make sure I was talking about the right thing. My Twitter handle and website are there. WP Scholar is kind of the brand I go by. But so I've been doing WordPress development now for, I think, about 9 years, something like that. So I started out actually not even thinking I was going into web development, but that's kind of where I ended up. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about, oh yeah, helps if you turn it on. There we go. Tell you about me and kind of my background and where I came from. So really, I'm assuming most of you were probably in the keynotes talk where Sam Smith was talking about, he's just getting started and, kind of his path in getting started in WordPress and discovering the community and that kind of thing. And I'm going to kind of attack things from the other end, right? So I've been doing this for a while. I feel like I've kind of, I don't know everything, but I definitely have learned a lot in the last 9 years about WordPress and about development in general. In addition to that, before I got into WordPress development, I also had my own company I ran for 12 years. I had a lawn care company. I grew that from a kid pushing a mower to having multiple trucks and equipment. And I got my degree in business. I also had a martial arts school that I ran for a while before I actually made the transition into web development, which I didn't even do directly. I kind of thought that since I had done all my own online marketing for my lawn care company and for my martial arts studio, I was thinking, well, I'm not too bad at this online marketing thing. I think I could find clients for other people. And really, I was thinking small. I was thinking, well, maybe I can find local clients like lawn care companies that kind of do like I do, or maybe some plumbing or small local businesses, and I can help them rank in Google and actually help them do that kind of thing. Maybe do some online advertising, something like that. So I kind of went down that path. I ended up the economy actually started tanking about the time that I decided I was really ready to be done. So of course, the first thing when the economy goes down, everybody goes out and gets a lawnmower, starts mowing yards. But the brilliant thing about that is that good customers are at a premium. So I actually had a lot of good clients, and I was able to sell those to other reputable companies and make decent money enough that I had some time to actually say, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm 100% focused, and I'm not gonna split my time between two things. I'm gonna focus 100% on where I want to go, and I'm going to get customers. I'm going to do SEO. I'm going to do this stuff. And so that was kind of my focus. I gave myself 4 months. I said, if in 4 months I don't have enough clients to support myself, then I'm done. I'm going to go find a real job. I got, that'll give me about 2 months easily of, researching and finding a company, figuring out what I want to do next. So that was kind of where I was at. And really what I ended up doing, kind of, that focus that I had actually got me a little beyond where I thought I would be. Within a week or two, I actually had my first client in Israel. And then I had a client in the UK. And then I had a client in Australia. I had a client in Canada before I ever got a client in the US. And I was sitting here thinking I was just going to get local clients. I was able to do that. And so, it worked out really well. And but ultimately, what I also discovered is I'm not really that into internet marketing. While I'm good at it, I don't love it. It's subjective. Clients will fight with you over why they're not really ranking #1 on Google when I told them up front that I can't really do that. I can't guarantee that. But the thing that they all had in common is they all had WordPress sites. And I had done enough development for my own lawn care website, and I had done development for my own martial arts studio website that I knew enough. But it wasn't something that I felt like, I could go make money building things for people. So, and that's kind of, I think that everybody, when they first start off in something new, they're like, do I really have what it takes? And you think small, kind of like I was with the SEO, the internet marketing, right? Like, I can do something small. But really, everybody has the ability to do something much bigger as long as you put your mind to it and you can focus in on it. So really, what I want to talk about today is how you can, really this applies to anything, but particularly focusing today on development. So as a developer, how do you identify where you're at the moment, and how do you plot out where you want to be next? How do you make sure that you're not in a slump and staying there just because of your mental mindset? And how do you make sure that you kind of optimize your journey and make sure that you're actually reaching your full potential? So that's kind of the goal of this talk, which I know is kind of high and lofty, but hopefully we can get it down to some like real usable stuff here. So the first thing I want to talk about is something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. So there's language around this phenomena. If you're not familiar with it, there were two psychologists called Dunning and Kruger who created this thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect. So this basically came out of a study, which I think, best I can tell, there was kind of this incident. And it's a rather entertaining incident. So there's this guy who went and he robbed a bank. And he did so with no mask on his face or any kind of disguise whatsoever. And he did it in a bank where there were video cameras. And much to his amazement, the police caught him not long after he did this. And he was so just dumbfounded as to how he had been caught, when obviously the cameras should not have possibly been able to pick up his face because he was wearing lemon juice on his face. Which, as you all know, is of course invisible ink, which would render you perfectly invisible, I'm sure. And so really these two psychologists were just trying to investigate, do stupid people really know that they're stupid? And that was basically kind of where it came from. But there's kind of two sides of the coin to it. But yeah, it's kind of this effect of, what in the heck's going on? So really, the study that they ended up doing was with students who are taking tests, right? So they're taking a test, but before they take the test, on the topic, they would ask the students, how would you rank your perceived ability in this area that you're about to be tested on? And so that's what this blue line here represents. And then they would actually do the test, right? So these are the actual scores on the green line. And then before they actually told them what their scores were, they would ask the students and say, what is your perceived test score? Like, how well do you think you did on this test? And that's what this red line is. So you can see that the blue and red lines are pretty close, right? So they're about the same. But the actual test scores are way different. So what you actually see is that the people who did really poorly on the test thought they did way better than they really did. So indicating that maybe stupid people don't necessarily know that they're stupid. But on the other end, some people did better than they thought they had, indicating that some people don't know that they're better than they really are, right? So it's kind of two sides of the coin. And I think all of us kind of go through these ranges where sometimes we don't know what we don't know. We're getting into something new, and we're like, hey, I think I understand this. And you have no idea at all. And it's not that you're stupid. It's just that you're learning, right? Like, you've not gotten to that point where you've hit certain experiences, so there's a lot of stuff you don't know yet. So really, it kind of breaks down into these two things. So we have the illusory, I always say that wrong, superiority, where, for example, new developers are often more confident in their abilities than they should be. And I actually see this a lot. I've interviewed a lot of developers, and sometimes I'll get these developers who are just like, yeah, I could do this, I could do that. And then you get these other developers who are like, yeah, man, like, I can do that, totally. And it's the ones that are kind of like, oh, yeah, I've done something like that before. Those are the ones that are like really good. And the ones that are like, oh, yeah, I can definitely do this, blah, 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 blah. Those are the ones that really, they don't, you give them a live code test or something, and they kind of botch it up a little bit. Because they don't have as much experience, and sometimes they're a little overconfident. And that's fine. Everybody's there at some point. But the other end of spectrum here is imposter syndrome, right? We hear a lot about this. If you've been doing development for a while, you get those experiences, and you kind of get beat down after a while, and you think, man, I'm not good at this, and I see these people around me, they're doing this, that, and the other, and you know, I don't think I'm anything unique, right? And so you kind of beat yourself up when really you're actually better than a lot of people in whatever area it is that you're working. So it's just important to be aware of kind of both sides of this as you're thinking about where you are at the moment. And we'll get a lot more detailed with this, but I thought this was a good quote. He that is not aware of his ignorance will only be misled by his knowledge. It's been around for a while, but it's basically the same idea, right? So one of the things I've realized is it takes competence to recognize competence. So one of the things that I do, I work at an agency in Atlanta, and so I'm the technical director, and I end up having to hire people, right? And a lot of times what I find is if you have a recruiter go and find you someone, they don't necessarily know what you do or how things work, and you don't get as good a quality from those recruiters as you would if you as a developer went out and said, hey, I'm going to run you through some code and see how you do, and let's see what your skill level is. So, so really, in order to recognize competence, it takes competence. So how can anyone at the beginning stages of their career and development actually understand what they need to know if they don't know what they need to know, right? So that's kind of the catch-22. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of look at this from two sides. So this is, so ideally the goal of this is that you'll be able to look at this and at the end of this be able to plot out where you are. Maybe you're in different points with different areas of expertise, right? Maybe different languages or whatever. But ultimately we've got confidence here on the vertical and then competence on the horizontal. And then essentially the Dunning-Kruger effect kind of works out this way, right? So there's kind of this up and down. So initially you tackle something new and you kind of get this burst of confidence, you know, that initial surge of like, yes, I did it, I figured it out, I'm awesome. And then shortly after that you realize, oh crap, I don't know anything. And then you go like, I can't even do this. Like, I'm a total imposter, I have no idea what I'm doing. And then, you know, eventually you work your way back out of that. So yeah, so this is kind of where the illusory superiority, you know, right at that peak there, right before you take that nosedive, that's kind of where that works out. And then at the other end, down at the bottom, at the very bottom, is imposter syndrome. So we're not really going to focus so much on these two things, but just be aware that's kind of what this charts out to. We're going to talk more about this from the perspective of a learning roadmap. So we're going to break it down into a few different sections here. So first one here is anytime you learn something new, you don't really know what you're doing. You're just imitating somebody who does, right? And I think we all do that with development. You know, we want to learn how to use React, or we want to learn how to use, you know, write our first WordPress plugin, or get something into the WordPress repository. We don't really know how to do that. We have to go find a tutorial online and watch somebody do it. Maybe we follow along. So we just imitate what other people are doing. We don't really know how to write the code that does that, but we'll copy and we'll paste it. And there we go. So imitation, right? That's kind of how we all start. And this particular phase, this initial phase, is lots of enthusiasm. You can copy, you can paste. Hey, it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But you know, typically if you're working under the guidance of some tutorial or online program that you're going through, you know, those are designed to encourage you and to really give you success, right, as you're working and learning new things. But the kind of the tricky thing, so up here on the top, so basically the first word that came up here, so that's the kind of the phases that we'll go through. Down here on the bottom is going to be kind of like the feelings that come along with that. And then up here at the very top are the things that you want to do to try to optimize your progress at each of these stages. Really, I don't think you can avoid these stages, so you're going to go through this roller coaster one way or the other. But ultimately, recognizing that you are and realizing the path forward, I think, is the key. So focus is the key here, right? When you learn something new, you have to focus obviously on learning, but beyond that, a lot of times what happens is I go through a online training course, right? It works out, it's cool. Still don't feel like I'm ready, so I go through another one. I'm like, oh, this one was different. I feel like I'm missing something. Maybe I need another online training course. So let's do this one over here. Oh, but this one's good too, so I don't know. Maybe we'll do both. And so everybody kind of gets, it's easy to get distracted because there's multiple paths. You never know which one's correct. And you feel like if I go down this one, I might be missing out. So let me just cover my bases and try to do everything. And so that's kind of the trap that you can fall into. Really, yeah, so we'll back up for a second. So exposure versus engagement, right? So when you're learning something new, it is important to kind of expose yourself to all the things. But at the same time, there's a difference between exposing yourself to all the things and actually doing all the things. You don't want to do all the things. You want to talk to people, figure out what they're doing, expose yourself to the tools people are using, the approaches that they take, get the lay of the land, maybe watch some videos. But really, when it comes down to actually digging in and getting your hands dirty, you want to make sure that you do have that focus. So it's okay to be, kind of get the spectrum from a high level, but when you're ready to dig in, you got to focus and actually engage. And also, it's very important to understand what your learning style is, right? So it's not just about verbal, kinesthetic, auditory, or visual, kind of the 4 major styles of learning that you typically learn about. There's a whole lot of other things that come into play, right? Some people are social learners. Some people would rather just sit and, go through an online course as opposed to be in a classroom. Some people just can't learn online. So it's important to kind of understand how you learn, what environment is best for learning for you, and try to optimize that, right? So don't just, because it worked for somebody else, assume that it's going to work for you. Make sure you really understand you before you try to tackle that. And yeah, so this is kind of the question that everybody asks. They're like, well, I'm just trying to get started. What's the thing? What's the ticket, the silver bullet that I can use to get me through what I need to know so I can start making money and doing stuff? And really what everybody always tries to have an answer. They're like, well, I recommend this course or this thing or that. And really, I think the best thing that anybody could tell you is there is no right answer, right? The important thing is that you have a path and that you take it. And when you realize it's not the best one for you, you change it. You take a side road, but you always focus on where you're going, right? So you try to pick the best destination, and if it doesn't work out, you go another route. Because it really doesn't matter. There's 100 different things you need to know in development, and if you try to say, well, if I just can learn React, or if I can just learn WordPress, or if I can just learn this, then I'll have it made, right? But maybe the way that you think and the way that you approach problems, there's a tool out there that you'll just excel at, and you'll be way better than everybody else. Be flexible, be open to that kind of thing, and just realize that, as long as I'm focused and I, keep on trucking, then you'll get there. So again, forward focus. Keep that focus, keep on moving, and be ready to just be flexible. And the other thing too is mile markers, right? So this one I think is in Colorado. They couldn't do the 420. So that's 419.99. But yeah, so anything that you do, you've got to have a plan. So even if you've been doing development for a while, it's good to have a plan, to have these mile markers of like, how do I know I'm making progress in where I'm at? Because a lot of times we get into a project and we're like, oh yes, I've got to get stuff done. I don't have time to slow down and learn this new thing or that. But really, do you have time not to learn those things? You have to figure out, a plan. For me, I try to, every project I take on, I say, what do I want to get out of this project for me? It's not about necessarily the client. We obviously have to fulfill those client needs, but at the same time, we have to say, what is it out of this project that I can get, that I can reuse, that will make me a better developer, And those are the kind of goals and milestones that even if you don't plan out for the year or figure out, I want to, in the next month, do this, at least every project say, you know what, I think this portion of code is something that if I did it really well, I could use it on the next project. So start small, and then what you'll start to realize is that you'll buy yourself more and more time, and it's kind of like the snowball effect. If you've ever heard all those people talking about, getting out of debt, you pay off a little bit, and you pay off your highest interest rate, and then you work your way down, and you get more and more money to be able to pay off all that debt. Works the same way with time, right? You're spending time on things. Some of those things aren't that important, and the more time that you can buy and the more leverage that you can get out of the projects that you're doing, then the more you're going to progress as a developer. So once you kind of get out of this imitation phase, you actually get into practice, and that's where you start to kind of nosedive, because now I kind of liken it to a GPS, right? So you've got a GPS in the car. It's telling you where to go. You get to the destination, and your GPS breaks. Now you have to hopefully remember how you got to where you were and actually be able to get back. So when we're doing these online training courses, what happens is we have lots of really good resources, and we have lots of success, and then we go out to do stuff on our own, and we start to encounter failure. And that's when the GPS is gone. We're not sure where we're going, and so we kind of start to lose confidence. But at the same time, we're getting experience because we're not copying anymore. We're doing it for ourselves. So that's the key part here. But it's a lot of confusion, right? So you start to wonder, like, why is this not working? It worked last time I did it. Like, I just, it's the same thing, just different. So the key thing here is feedback. When things start breaking, you need to have a good feedback loop so that you can start to identify what those things are. And this works in several ways. So let's see. Yeah. So basically, I don't know how many people here actually do local development on your machine. So, most of the time, like when I first started, there was FTP. I would upload a file. I would test something, and if it didn't work, then I'd have to, probably already had that file on my machine, but I'd change some code. I'd push that file back up. I'd go to the browser, reload the browser. I would check it. It just still didn't work. So then I'd go back to the file. I'd be like, okay, what's wrong? And now there's no way for me to know what's wrong. I'm just guessing here. So I go and change something else, and then I upload that file, and then I test in the browser. Still doesn't work. So it takes me a long time to kind of get this feedback of like, oh, it's broken. Still not working. I need to do something. So local development is just a way of speeding up that feedback loop, right? All the files are on your machine. Now you don't have to upload that file, because that's the thing that takes the most time, is uploading that file up to FTP. Boom, getting it up there. So now all the files are on my machine. I can test right there on my machine. I don't have to do a whole lot of work. And then there's also other tools as well that can help you tighten those feedback loops. But really, if you think about it, if I spend 50% of my time uploading files to figure out something's not working, as opposed to not having to do that, then I can save 50% of my time to help figure out the problem, and I save a whole lot of time in the process. So again, when you start to encounter things breaking, there's also tools that will help you. And one that really helped me was something called PHP or Xdebug, or there's Xendebug technically, but Xdebug I think is kind of the thing most people use. Basically what that is it allows me to, rather than doing what I call the poor man's debugger, where you just var dump everything in PHP or console.log everything in JavaScript, actually using a debugger. So if you're doing JavaScript, you can actually just do this in Chrome. But if you're using PHP, there's Xdebug. Basically, you can step through line by line of the code and see it execute and watch variables get set incorrectly and things slowly crash. So you can kind of walk through and see what's going wrong, right? And really, for me, one of the key things that made a huge difference was not just using this debugging tool as a way to find out why things were breaking, but to really just explore WordPress. So I took Xdebug and I said, oh, this thing lets me step line by line through the code. Sure, I can figure out why my thing is broken, but why stop there? Why not step line by line through every single file and every single thing that WordPress does when it executes and figure out how it works, right? So now I haven't just figured out a quicker way to get to a solution for a specific problem, but I've found a tool that allows me to explore in depth into WordPress and get a view of WordPress that no one else seems to have, right? No one really digs in and goes line by line through all of WordPress. How many people have done that? Maybe it's not very often that I encounter people that have done that. So it's amazing. I recommend everybody should do that. But when I started, I didn't know about that tool, so I had something called Google, right? I didn't actually even do an online training course. I used Google 100%. My first project was like a $2,000 project. Took me 2 months, but it was a kind of a crazy complicated project too. I told him I was like, yeah, sure, I can do that. Again, had no idea what I was doing. I knew enough to code and figure things out, but Google was my friend. But I have a rule now about Google, right? If you can't find the answer in 10 minutes on Google, chances are you're not going to find your answer on Google. You can fiddle around and waste hours Googling things. But really what I've found is if I spend 10 minutes and I don't find the answer, chances are I did something really dumb, and it's not worth anybody else posting stuff that dumb on Google, right? Nobody wants to post their most embarrassing moments on Google so that everybody else can figure out what went wrong, right? So it's kind of on you to figure out creative ways to work through the situation and figure out the problem. You can reach out to friends that are developers. Sometimes you don't have that. You know, I was kind of starting out. I didn't know any other developers at all. So I just got creative in my problem solving. And so I think encouraging yourself to just stick it out and do what I like to call it, give it a good college try, not just a high school try. Like you're really going to go for it, and try to figure it out. So yeah, so good feedback, keeping the feedback loops tight so that you're figuring out why things are going wrong faster and coming to solutions faster. That's going to get you quicker to the point where you're no longer practicing and trying to figure out what's going wrong. You're now actually understanding why things are going wrong, and you're starting to work your way into this build phase where you can actually create usable things of value. Now this one kind of is two parts. So we're going to kind of look at it in the two different parts. The first one here is, again, this is kind of uncertainty. So this is really kind of your imposter syndrome a lot of times. Yeah, there we go. See? So basically, the key thing that you want to do here is to collaborate. So really, if you get to this point where you're really building things and you haven't gotten to be a part of a community yet, you definitely want to become part of a community. So I think the fact that you're all here means that you've at least gotten that far, right? But collaboration is very important. So this, when I was doing martial arts, they actually had this, but they didn't actually have an exact quote on the wall, but it was essentially the same thing. Whether you think you can or can't, you're absolutely right. So really, your mental mindset can hold you back. And if you go, there's a lot of TED Talks on like neuroplasticity, and like people that actually think they can do stuff can actually do more than people that don't think they can do stuff. So, and I completely believe in that. I mean, if you have a positive outlook and you just press forward and keep going, you'll be able to figure it out. But yeah, so collaboration is something that, you know, everybody has a unique perspective. I don't know if anybody's seen this picture before. There's a lot of other pictures just like it. But if you look at this picture, some people see an old lady and some people see a young girl. So, you know, everybody's going to look at a problem and they're going to put their own spin on it and see something unique and something different. And the key is to be able to expand your view and perspective of the problem that you're looking at. And again, like I was talking about, you know, if I don't find the answer on Google, it's about finding some sort of creative solution to the problem. And sometimes that just means changing your perspective, getting somebody else's point of view, or, you know, a different experience. Sometimes it could be totally different industries or whatever, but being able to kind of have that unique perspective is important. Pair programming is a very effective way of collaborating. When you have somebody actually watching you write code And they're like, why are you doing that? I would do it this way. And you have to explain why you would do something. It's a very effective way of just sharing knowledge. And I think there's, how many people here actually do some sort of pair programming at all? So it's not, as much as people talk about it, not as many people do it, which is kind of a shame because, you know, I think I've been able to do a lot of pair programming with some really smart people, and I've learned a lot from it. So, you know, find a buddy and give it a try. You know, get used to it. Especially some companies will actually, that is their deal, right? Like you have to pair up with people and work that way. So hey, if you want to get one of those jobs, you might want to give this a try. And code reviews, that's another thing, right? So sometimes, you know, where I work, we review each other's code. So if I write code, then I do a pull request into the repository. Somebody else looks at the code, reviews it, and maybe says, hey, I see you're doing this way. Again, it's just like pair programming. Somebody else commenting on what you're doing and you know, asking you to explain why you're doing something a certain way. This allows you to do the same kind of thing. But sometimes you don't have that luxury of somebody in the company. You know, maybe you're a freelancer. You don't have that other person to review your code. But that's also the beauty of GitHub, right? Like you find some friends on GitHub and say, you know, hey, I just released a new thing on GitHub. You mind looking at it? Or even if it's a private project you're working on, say, hey, if I share this Bitbucket repo with you, can you look at my code and give me some feedback? For me, when I first got into WordPress, after I kind of got through that first 2-month project where I had made very little money, I ended up, one of my goals for that project was I want to release a real WordPress plugin into the repository. So I took a slider that I built for that particular site, and I ended up releasing it as a WordPress plugin, which to date has about 300,000 downloads. So what happened with that is I actually released it up, and it got like a handful of downloads. But I got one person that said, hey, it'd be really cool if your plugin did this. And I was like, oh yeah, that is a cool idea. I never thought about that. So it wasn't really a code review per se, but I was getting feedback. And there was some sort of collaboration. I had me, the developer, and my users trying to figure out what's the best tool to create here. So I made that one change. And then I got a handful of more people using it. And I actually got, like, I think 2 people. They were like, hey, you know, these are some things that we want. And so I started adding things. Now, at a certain point, I added a little too much. I don't recommend using this thing I built at this point. But so it's important to kind of gauge that and you know, not go crazy, but take everything with a grain of salt. But it's important to kind of get that feedback and just put yourself out there. I mean, it's real scary to have other people looking at your code and like judging you. But the key is not to judge people. It is to just share what you know. And I think that's the key about, you know, WordPress and the community here is that we're not, you know, no one's standing around judging you, being like, hey, why in the world do you do this way? You know, everybody's got some room for improvement. And I think encouraging people to make these moves in the right direction of like, hey, let's talk about it. Let's work it out, you know, and figure out a good solution for what you're trying to do. And you know, having somebody hang over your shoulder is always good. If you can find a mentor. Personally, I think if you're asking somebody to be your mentor, you're doing it wrong. You don't just ask somebody to be your mentor. You try to provide some sort of value, right? So if you find a developer that's better than you, figure out something you could do to help them, right? Like maybe you're really good at project management and you want to learn development, and they don't have a project manager, you know? Like make some sort of trade, work it out. But find somebody who is better than you. Even if you just meet once a month and say, hey, look, I wrote this thing. You mind checking it out? It's amazing what, you know, a little help from somebody who's been there before will do. So collaborating. OK, are we already at? OK. No, yeah, you're good. I was wondering where we're at. So yeah, so collaboration is very important. So then kind of the next stage of building is efficiency, right? So at first you're just getting the work done, but you're creating things that are of value. Now you're not just getting the work done, you're finding better ways of doing it. And so that's a important distinction, but essentially you're still just building things, right? So this is where you start to get into a little bit of automation and reuse. So maybe you're figuring out how to package things up in repositories or use different tools to kind of reuse that. So for me, at the moment, I've realized that I've got, been doing this for 9 years. I've got lots of code that I've written on older projects, and it's not useless, right? It's valuable code that I've written. Maybe it's not easy to reuse at the moment, but you shouldn't really let anything go to waste. So I've actually gone back to some projects. I think I went back as far as 5 years and found some code. I'm like, this is super awesome code, and I actually only used it once. I showed some friends who actually have used it a lot, but it was code that I wrote that's useful. So what I've done is I've started trying to get those bits and pieces that I've done and put them into packages on GitHub that I or other people can use. So just being able to realize, I used to think, oh, plugins are the way to package everything, right? Like they're perfect. You could just install them and WordPress, and it's awesome. But sometimes you actually need to put things not in a plugin. Maybe there's other ways of packaging it, because WordPress has plugins, but they also have must-use plugins, which the client can't turn off, which is an important thing. Sometimes you have plugins, and if a client turns them off, they can just break their stuff, and then they get really mad. But if you put in an MU plugin, they can't turn it off. They don't even really know it's there. But it's an easy way, if you've written custom code, to kind of package that. But again, at the same time, there's also something called Composer. So if you use PHP, you can write small modules or libraries that you can plop into any project, and it'll add just little bits and pieces of functionality. So I've kind of done that with my GitHub, but then there's also other things you can do to automate. So for example, I've got it's a little bit odd, but I wrote a Node script that will basically generate PHP code to create content types and different things like that in the way that I like to build it. So just everybody will have their own way of approaching the problem. But the more that you can do to kind of streamline and make your work more efficient, the obviously more you'll be able to build for people. But again, once you start focusing on this efficiency aspect, you're starting to buy yourself more time, right? The snowball effect. And so now you can focus more. Oh yeah, I had pictures to go with all that. But yeah, so like testing, like a lot of times when you first start development, you don't even think about testing. You don't care about testing. It's just a lot of work. Or if you're trying to create, like, when I'm writing code, I don't necessarily know what that code's going to look like. I have to play around with it, fiddle with it, change the architecture a little bit. And eventually I'll come up with something that's kind of cool. But it's important, especially if you have some sort of product, or once you do get that architecture down, if anybody else is going to be working on that code, testing is an important part of it. And it's going to buy you time, because now instead of somebody coming to you like, oh yeah, I broke that thing and I don't really know how it works, you can have tests in there that say, oh, you broke that thing and you broke this part of it. It's helpful. Having things like project scaffolding. So there's tools out there like Yeoman or Slush or all kinds of tools that will basically make it easy for you to create something. It kind of gives you the foundation for new things, right? So if you think about WordPress theming, there's a theme out there called Underscores. And so it's just basically the bare bones theme. And so it has no CSS. It allows you to put all your own custom CSS. But it's got all the theme templates created. It's taking into account all of the commenting in WordPress and all that kind of good stuff. So it gives you a good structure, a good kind of scaffold for creating a theme. So it's important, like, to think about whatever it is that you build. If you build plugins, you might want to have a scaffold off of which you create all of your plugins. And likewise, for all of your projects, you might want to have a base starting point for all of your projects. So that's scaffolding, and that's another tool that will make it easy for you to efficiently create and work on new projects. And this is kind of something most people don't think about, but you spend 90% of your time reading code. So if you write messy code, you're going to spend more of your time trying to read the messy code that you wrote 6 months later, or even the same day. So taking some time to format that code well, comment it well, and make sure it's actually easy to read. And again, kind of one of the WordPress standards for coding, right, is making sure that you are clear as opposed to concise, because sometimes being concise is a lot less clear. So the easier you make your code to read, not only you make it easier on yourself, but you make it easier on other developers who come behind later. And this is really more along the lines of the modular reuse. But yeah, so as soon as you get to the automation phase here, you're starting to buy more and more of your time to focus on bigger problems, higher level things. And so as you get into kind of what I call the mastery phase here, you start to go from efficiency into effectiveness. And really, this is where you actually start to strategize and think higher level about not just the code, but what does this mean in the client's perspective of their business? What does it mean in terms of the WordPress ecosystem or whatever ecosystem that you're working in? How can I leverage the things I've built to be effective and help not just this client or that client, but to actually, who knows, make the internet a better place, right? So being able to think at a much higher level and ask the right questions is important. So always keep an eye out for, I like this, mind the gap is perfect. In anywhere that you're learning something new, you're always going to find that there's some sort of knowledge gap between what you know and what you want to know. So always being aware of that. And this is just some of the things I think are important. And really, the sooner you can do it, the better. But I do give a lot of talks, and it's always awkward to put this up here. But I think that this is really how I like to learn. I like getting in front of people and being forced to explain like how and why I do things is what forces me to kind of refine how and why I do things, right? So it's very important to, and actually they've done studies where students who take tests do about half as well as students who are forced to present to their peers. So the sooner that you realize that, hey, I know something and it might be of use to someone, pitch it at a WordCamp talk and give it a shot, right? Like Sam Smith, he's only been doing this for just a little while and he gave the keynote speech, right? So there's no harm in trying. And vary your inputs, right? Like WordPress is a great community, but it isn't the only community. There's a whole lot of different communities out there, and you can learn a whole lot from a whole lot of people. So vary the communities and inputs as far as that goes. And this is one of my favorite quotes as far as strategy and high-level thinking. You can't solve your problems with the same thinking we used when we created them, right? Like you had a certain perspective when you first tackled problem A, but as you get further along in your experience and you start to realize how things work, you'll start to approach problems differently. And that's how you become more and more valuable. The more experience, the more perspective that you can gain, the more value you have. And I think a lot of people underestimate their ability to provide that value. And that's where even when you start to get into some of those later phases, I think you can still encounter imposter syndrome, even though you're becoming better and better at what you do. So yeah, so this is kind of the overview, and I think we're actually running out of time, so we might have a few minutes for questions. But yeah, hopefully this kind of framework is helpful in helping you realize, this is where I am, even if it's not your overall development skill set. Maybe it's a subset of your skills. This is kind of fractal, but helping you realize where you're at and how you should kind of navigate and what you should focus on. And I'm happy to answer questions or stick around outside after, but if you got a question.
What's your plugin?
My plugin? So I've got about 12 plugins, but the one that I was talking about that you shouldn't use is a promotion slider. Okay. Yeah, it's I thought, and again, this was me thinking, oh, I'm not that great. I was like, oh, this is just another jQuery slider plugin. There's a whole bunch of these. No one's going to use my thing, but I want to have something. I want to figure out how to get something on the repository. But I had a unique spin on it, and I didn't realize I had a unique spin on it. And a lot of people started using it, and people still do. So, unfortunately. So, but all right, I think, yeah, we got like 2 minutes if you got more questions. So.
First I want to say thank you so much because I don't feel alone anymore with all these, like, you know, this whole thoughts and what goes on. Like, I didn't realize it was actual, like, you
yeah, there's science.
This.
Yeah.
I go through.
Right.
But the next thing I want to ask is, like, when you're at a certain place, like, say, like, I'm at a spot now where, like, I'm in school and been in school for development and learning on my own, and like, okay, I got HTML5 and I got CSS3 and I don't know where to go next. Like, I have some other server-side stuff that's like older, like ASP, and like, so if I talk to developers and I'm like, some people say do JavaScript and some people say do jQuery and some people say do PHP, and I'm like, I don't know where to go next.
Yeah, I think really sometimes it's just changing how you ask the question, right? Mm-hmm. So like you're going to talk to people who are going to favor JavaScript, and you're going to talk to people who favor PHP. Yep. But if you ask them why they chose PHP or why they chose JavaScript, if they can't explain it, don't listen to them. Right. If they can't explain it, then they have very good reason for why they're doing what they're doing, and anything that they say is going to be of great value, right? In helping you make that decision. Now, of course, they may be biased in one way or the other, and I think ultimately the important thing is to think about what you want to build. So don't think about the language or that. Think about what you want to build, and then when you're talking to a developer and you say, you know, why did you pick what you picked? Mm-hmm. If it aligns with your goal and the thing you want to build, then you know it makes sense to use it.
So learn what you want to, like, as a solution to what you want to produce in the end. So
correct.
So backwards.
Yeah, and for me, like, I don't want to just be an everyday client comes to me and I do work and whatever they want gets done. I mean, you have to do that, right? But I want to get to the point where, you know, I've got a product and I'm managing, and I've picked out something that I want to do, and I'm going to go for it. You know, and whatever's going to get me there, you know, that's what I want to find out. So, yeah. Cool. Well, I think we're definitely out of time, so appreciate it. But if you got questions, we'll catch me later. So.